communities. Without further ado, I would like to welcome my first speaker, or our first speaker, Victoria Tran from Kitfox Games. I'm not sure if you're introducing yourself or if I'm doing that, but handing over to Victoria Tran, Communications Director at Kitfox Games, really, really good community person from the Montreal community, and also online working. They work with Boyfriend Dungeon, Lucifer Within Us, publishing Dwarf Fortress, many, many other things. And very happy to have you with us.
I'm so happy to be here. Okay, I'm gonna start my video screen sharing. We did this, so I should be able to do this. Everyone can see my screen, I assume.
Yes, works.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Thank you for the introduction. I totally have introductory slides, but it's fine. We're gonna work with it. We're gonna work with it. Okay. Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm super excited to be talking to you about designing better communities. It is obviously something that I love and want to talk about all the time. So to be able to do it online with all of you is super great. So yeah, we're going to talk about designing better communities. And brief intro, already kind of talked about it, but feel free to tweet me at the Tran. I'm the communications director at Kitfox Games. As Tobias said, we develop and publish a bunch of games, maybe some of which you've heard of. But the thing for me is that no matter what game we publish or develop, that the community they decide to join is a welcoming and friendly place. So I want to talk about designing better communities from a more macro perspective. But first, I kind of want everyone to imagine their ideal community. You don't need to actually like write out what you want, but the point is that I don't think we should create spaces out of thin air or think banning bad people is all there is to real community development. We need goals, and we need to know what an ideal community looks like and how it functions and why we want it to be this way. When I talk to a lot of devs, they tend to know they want a community, but neglect considering what kind of belongingness they want from their communities. And then those who do consider it might decide they want fluffy things like positive, healthy, engaged, nice, and so many other things, which is great, but doesn't actually describe what actions to take. So we're going to talk about how we get there. So super quick agenda. We're going to talk about rules / social systems, writing rules, and kind of the payoffs when it comes to that. And of course, before we get into that, I also like to caveat this because one, these things will not automatically make your community safer. This takes time and continuous effort. Two, this isn't some mass strategy dreamed up to get user retention and hit your KPIs. And while overall it will help retention over time, it will not look like this at first. And as with anything, there are a ton of variables that you'll have to think about depending on team size, game size, and community size. So our community strategies may only have been as successful as they are because we're relatively small. So giant mega communities that have million unit selling games probably need additional strategies. Essentially, I want people to be mindful of how they love and interact with their games and not just what they love. So let's talk about community building from the perspective of something that's taken for granted because it's so prevalent, but really does matter, and that's rules. And obviously, there's a lot that goes into building better communities. Again, 15 minutes, so I really wanted to focus on the rules. And rules that I think aren't as helpful as people think they are things like don't be a dick, just be nice, be respectful, etc., things like that. These aren't productive or actually informative and often result in people disrupting the rules' meanings when they break it. And honestly, not being a bad person in a community is like the bare minimum someone should aim for. That's not even a standard. Like, it is the standard, actually. So you may think that, say, a violent FPS game will only attract violent, aggressive people, but this is wrong. Some of the nicest people can be found here, and the ultimate final tone is dependent on the structure of the space that you set out. So I'm not okay with superficial notions of being kind to one another or being good to one another, because that doesn't suffice. When we're kind, it doesn't mean we're giving people a pass for bad behavior. Responding with things like, oh, we just need to be kind to one another when something does something wrong, like, for example, I don't know, calling someone a slur, that brushes over very real complexities of life. So when we create rules and spaces, it means we need to think about the world, set up our spaces to be encouraging, empathetic, and accountable. So to better understand this, I think of rules and communities as social systems. So understanding social systems is key to understanding communities. And what is that exactly? So social systems are the relationships between individuals, groups, and institutions. They basically can predict and shape your behavior, and it influences it by what group you're a part of. So for example, the way you behave and interact at work is very different than how you behave at home. The same goes for whether you're in a hospital, a library, school, museum, etc. These systems have their own set of rules that allows the group and institution as a whole to function smoothly. And breaking the rules causes chaos or resistance. And game communities are exactly the same. So in the book, The Forest and the Trees by Alan G. Johnson, he uses the board game Monopoly as an example. So Monopoly is a mini social system with rules. Following these rules offer the path of least resistance to playing the game, but following them also impacts player behavior. So if you've played Monopoly, you know the whole goal is to control the board and win, and winning involves making sure your opponents lose all their money and property. That is, players are led down one path, and that's greed. It's a rule set that not only encourages greed and all the attributes that come with that, but makes it a very necessary part of the experience. The point isn't if the game is fun or not, but that the rules encourage a certain set of behaviors for participation, regardless of your own personal values. And if you refuse to abide by them, like by cheating, the other players will probably get angry at you and they'll kick you out. So when we talk about social systems, it's important to consider what you, as a person privileged to be setting the rules, do with this. So Johnson says, notice that we can describe the game without saying anything about the personalities, intentions, attitudes, or other characteristics of the people who might play it. The game, in other words, has an existence that we can describe by itself, and it exists whether or not anyone is playing it. So that's the same as social systems. So what outcomes are you looking for with your rule set? What is the path of least resistance for community members? For Monopoly, it's greed, and for Kitfox, it's kindness. And that's great and all, but I understand that some people need to think about how you actually write the rules. And people will have different ideas of the rules and how they should be implemented in social systems. But at the very least, from the World Justice Project and honestly, sociology courses I've taken, these are the universal principles for the rule of law. So 1, they're clearly defined. So don't mince words, make it really easy to understand. 2, they're publicized, they're easy to find and see. 3, stable, they don't change frequently, they don't change often. 4, they're just, so they seem reasonably fair considering what it is. And most importantly, for a lot of people that I don't see happen a lot, is 5, which is it's applied evenly and quickly to everyone, no matter of influence. So as an example, and don't worry about reading all of this right now because I'm going to break it down, these are the rules in the Kitfox Games Discord. I want us to be more aware of the wording we use in rule creations, and while it's okay to reference rules from other studios, I think you should definitely change them to fit your own community. Every space is different, and the rules should evolve as your community does. So the first set of rules that you usually see in any space are the very basic ones, the kind that you're like, of course it has that, like no harassment, no not safe for work content, don't spam people. That's pretty normal. Don't think I have to get super into that. I love to have a framing rule in my rule set. So basically it's a point in the rule set that of my expectations for how I want the community to vibe and interact with each other. I think it really sets up how people understand like what I am expecting of them in terms of not just being a bad person. Like I want them to be proactively great. And I think, again, like I've said, it's really a disservice to ignore the world, but it is also an intense stress to moderate. So if they aren't able to communicate with each other effectively, then I think it's totally okay to shut things down when you need it to be. This one rule is more specific to my community, as I've noticed a lot of people come to us and trust us with problems, and that's really flattering in its own way, but no one in the community is a mental health professional, and it'd be really irresponsible to fix anything or to think we can. So I add a point about mental health. And this kind of falls into evolving your rules to fit the needs of your community. Like the Kitfox Discord didn't start off with this rule. It was just something that I noticed more and more. And you have to kind of preemptively realize, oh, this is probably a resource or something I need to have in my space to make sure it functions smoothly. I love a value statement. I think it just really sets up the servers for people to understand what you're all about. I really love the statement from Marcella from Co-op, so I kind of took it from her. So thank you, Marcella. She let me. But yeah, it's something that I think that when people know what they're getting into, it makes it way easier in terms of moderating. Another important thing is to usually list out consequences. I let them know who they can contact, and it shouldn't be a volunteer moderator. It should be someone paid to handle this, and that's me. Having someone to go to is really important for sure. And often what I'll do is, like, when I know we have a big announcement coming up, meaning our Discord will be flooded with new people, is I'll warn the community that the censor bot, for example, will be hypersensitive to more words. And this helps drive the tone of what I expect from new people entering. And once that initial boom is over, I go back to relaxing the rules. And of course, there needs to be someone who is there to enforce the rules for this to work. You can't just have it be there and do nothing with it, or like be like afraid of touching it. You can't be afraid of rule enforcement. It helps drive more productive conversations and weeds out those that are there under false pretenses. The problem with no rules is that it will eventually attract people who either like to troll, cause chaos, post explicit things, etc., which will eventually drive out people who don't want to deal with it. Every forum needs rules to maintain its purpose and functionality. And when rules are broken, often what helps is a DM their way with an explanation or warning before any action is taken. People don't like to feel like things are unfair, rather than an outright call out for everyone to see. So shame and embarrassment in public is usually more effective for making the person feel defensive rather than receptive to change. If you can give people a chance to improve and learn, considering the situation, again, context matters, then it's usually worth it. And if someone's coming out of anger and you can try to talk to them, see if you can talk to them in a productive way and lead them to understand the tone of the community. And if they still don't understand, it might not be the community for them. Membership is a conditional privilege that you can remove at any time, and you get to set the tone. And of course, if it's a troll, someone just purposely there to cause chaos, ban them. There's a time and place for everything, and you can't work with that. It's really important as a rule setter to be decisive. Basically, nip toxic members at the bud. Don't keep them around because they talk and contribute to the space and you're afraid of silence. They take up space and drive away more genuinely interested members. All right, so we have social systems set up, and I just wanted to briefly talk about why it was so important to set up these rules. The first one is that ideally you will be offline, and you will need to be offline for many reasons. Mental health, you're at a convention, well, when we can travel again, vacation, you're busy, etc. A good community shouldn't collapse because you're not around. The better your rules, the better your community can sustain itself as they understand what is expected from them and from others. A lot of people think it's anonymity that creates trolls, or what I scientifically call jerks, but it's not just that. Anonymous acts of kindness also exists, and I argue it's when you have a person plus anonymity plus an audience that tolerates the behavior that kind of creates the jerk. And when you have rules, when people come in and they have the anonymity and they have an ethical space and they have an audience that isn't okay with what they're doing, you'll usually get a regular person or someone that sees that this community isn't right for them. And it works. There have been a lot of people who have looked into the efficacy of banning hate speech or setting clear rules and how that helps communities. In this case, the most recent thing, I guess, was Reddit. It's a little late, but whatever. Reddit has definitely been trying, I guess, to work on their hate speech and the kind of subreddits that are around. And there has been a study about how successful it has been and its efficacy. And highly recommend you read that if you have the time. As you solidify your community pillars and uphold your community to standards you set, the better your reputation becomes. So we've had people join Kitfox purely because people heard it was a positive place to be in, and that's really nice. And most newcomers see how people interact, see the reputation your community has, and naturally go along with this. It's a really pleasant circle of events. Designing kind of communities and moderation is not just about risk management. Its lifetime value will reward you, and people will want to interact, and they'll stick around for your future games to come, even if it's not necessarily their thing. And thank you for listening to my talk.
Wow. Oh, thank you. And how do you, let's look at the questions. If there are some questions so far, I think we are fine. Can't look at the Discord, but I guess people are also still wondering where they are themselves. How do you, maybe there's also a question for later for the panel, but just one. Where do you usually start to build? So to build like the second, if you are the community manager, to have your critical core group in place, how do you usually start? Is that, do you start so that like there's a core group which also cares about the community, or is it mostly completely on you?
As in when you first start, like
start a new
Discord
server,
channel?
start a new, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends again where your studio is at. If you are just starting out and you don't have a game and you don't really have anything, then you might not have a community yet. When Kitfox first started their Discord, we had like, let's say 6,000 Twitter followers. And the people who first join will be the most dedicated for sure, usually some of your biggest fans. And it's kind of from there, I think you can work out. You can set the general basic rules, see how everyone interacts, and adjust as you go along for sure. But it's hard to say, I guess, generally what you should do, since people are so different and your game will be so different and cultural differences will happen. So just basically just be empathetic, be aware, and listen to what's happening in your community.